And so what we're going to do is just create an item that our player can collect. And this is just going to be kind of a generic item, so you can think of it as like coins or like a score or something like that. We're not actually going to have the item have any special powers like unlocking a door or changing different states about the player. So we're just going to kind of get started with a basic type of interaction, and then we'll kind of add complexity to it later. So in my game, I'm going to make something that the player wants to collect. I'm going to model something real quick. I have two. Whoops, I opened my project twice. Okay, let's get rid of this one. Okay. I'm going to model something real quick in Blender. We're not going to do like a whole bunch of stuff in Blender, but I think it is useful to be able to do some really basic stuff. And so I'll just model things that we need occasionally, just so you can see a simple process and go over a couple things. Should I turn off the lights? Was that better last time?
It's easier to see the screen.
Yeah. I always forget about that.
Turn off the lights. This is kind of dark.
Yeah, that looks a lot better. Okay, so I'm just gonna make a simple apple for my player to collect, and you can use a primitive, or you can download something from another website. But if you want to start working on your own models, I'll show you a couple techniques that I use. So I'm going to start a new Blender file. I'm going to hit A to select everything, and then hit X and delete. And even though I just deleted the cube, I'm going to go ahead and add in a new cube. And then one thing that I'm going to do to add a little bit more dimension to the cube and data is I'm going to go to the modifier panel, which is this like little wrench. This is something that we use a lot, and I'm going to add a very common modifier to add, which is a subsurface. And this basically takes the geometry of the cube, and it doesn't change the actual geometry, but it changes how it displays, and so we see a little bit more detail. And then eventually, when we export this to Godot, we're going to want to apply that modifier, because the modifiers don't leave Blender. They're sort of like Photoshop layers. They add a little bit on top, but they, if you make something in Photoshop, eventually you're going to export and flatten everything together. So we're going to add a subsurf here, subdivision surface, and you can see it makes the cube look more like a sphere. But if I tab into my edit mode, so if I just hit tab, I go to edit mode where I can edit the geometry, you can see that there's still a cube shape, but we're displaying it as a sphere. And you can turn this on and off, so notice that there's a few buttons here. If I turn this off, we won't see it in the main view. And then if I go into edit mode, you can see this little mesh icon. If I turn that on or off, we'll just see the default. I can also change the levels of how much detail it adds. So if I turn up the levels, we see it adds a little bit more detail. So this is a good place to get started. So I've got my cube, I've got my subdivision surface modifier on here. And so to do modeling, if I want to do something simple, I'll just use edit mode rather than sculpt mode. So if I hit tab, I'm going to be in edit mode. And when we're in edit mode, you see the actual geometry of our mesh, and I can edit it. So there's a few buttons up here. This button here is to select individual vertices. This button is to select edges or the lines between vertices. And this button is to select faces. Usually I'll just have the vertices, and then if I click on a vertice, I can do all the same transformations that I can do with an object. So I can hit G and grab and move it around. And if I hit X, I'll move it just on the X axis. I can hit Y, or I can hit G and then Y and move it on the Y axis. Although I screwed something up. Oh yeah, I added a new vertice by mistake. So I'll hit G and then Y, and I can move it this way. So you can see the mesh changing shape as I do that. I can also rotate, so I can hit R. Although with just one vertice, rotation doesn't really matter. But if I take two vertices, so I hit Shift and I clicked on another vertice. Now if I hit G, I can move it around. And if I hit R, I can rotate it. So I can get different rotations. And this all depends on the view that you're looking at, unless you align it to an axis. So if I hit R and then X, I can't really rotate around the X because they're both on X. But if I do Y, you can see I can rotate it around that Y axis. So there's a lot of things that we can do with just those couple basic tools. If I hit A, it'll select all of the vertices, all the points. And if I double hit A, it'll unselect all the vertices. Another thing that I use a lot is this X-ray view, which allows me to see the vertices through the mesh. So if I toggle that on and off, you can see now I can select this vertice back here, even though it's on the other side of the mesh. Okay, so to make my apple, I'm just going to do a couple simple things. So one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hit A to grab all those vertices, and then I'm going to hit W. This brings up this menu where I can make some changes to the mesh, and I'm going to click Subdivide here, and it's going to add some new points. So now we see, the subdivision surface plus this kind of change that we've made here. So then I'm going to go into the top view. So I'll click on Z, and you can see this says top orthographic. And then I'm going to select the vertices in this top box here. So you can see I'm just selecting the top vertices like that. And then I'm going to scale these on. I'm going to do scale, and I'm going to scale these up a little bit. So I'm going to kind of make this top part of my mesh a little bit bigger. That's a little bit more than I wanted to do, but I'm going to scale again. And so when I scale, I'm just kind of like bringing this up a little bit. So I'm making kind of the top of my apple. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom, except I'm going to go the other direction. So I'm going to select all those vertices and scale that down a little bit. So I've got this kind of like square apple. I can select all these vertices again. And another thing I can do is, oh wait, actually I'm going to turn on, okay, I'm going to select all of my vertices now, except for these two middle ones. And then I'm going to go to, okay, so another thing that's really useful is this thing called loop tools. So if I want to turn on loop tools in Blender, this is an add-on, so it's not on by default, but I usually have it on. I'm going to hit Command, comma, to bring up my preferences window. And I'm going to go to add-ons, and I'm going to search for loop tools. Oh, it's one word, so loop tools. And so if I just turn on that, it's going to give me a whole bunch of new things that I can do that are really useful. So I'm going to go down here and save my preferences and then leave here. Now when I hit W, you see loop tools here, and I'm going to click circle. And so that's going to make my vertices more circular. And if I open up this little menu down here, I can increase how circular they are. I hit escape by mistake. Let's try that again. So I actually don't want an angle. What I want is the influence. Oh, it won't let me go. Okay, so it's all the way up. So you can see I can make these vertices a little more circular. And so that makes it a little bit more apple-like, but still kind of square. I'll turn off the X-ray for a second. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm not going to do everything 100%, right here, just because I don't have a ton of time, but we're just going to add a couple more things. Okay, so now I'm going to hit double A to deselect. And now I want to bring down the middle here a little bit. So another useful thing I can do, I'm going to select around this top part again. And another thing I can do that's really useful is inset. So if I hit I, oh, it's not letting me do it. I might have to select the whole middle. So if I want to select all of these verts in a line, another thing that's good to do is a box select. So I can hit B and then draw across all these vertices. I missed a few back here, so I'll just do that again. Okay, now if I hit I, okay, so now I can inset. So when I do an inset with I, it's going to add another sort of line in the middle of these vertices so I can create the top of my apple. And if I hit G and Z, I can lift this up a little bit. And then I'm going to do inset again and make a little center part, and then hit G and Z and move down a little bit. So now I've got this little apple area. And then I can't really see the inside because of the subsurf, so I'm going to turn that off for a second. Okay, so that's what my geometry looks like. I think I missed some of the verts when I did the circle, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to inset this one more time and make a really skinny one here. And then from here, I'm going to make my apple stem. So this is something that we also use a lot, which is extrude. So if I have a little area selected in Blender, I'm going to go to like a side view, and I'm going to hit E to extrude, and then Z. And I can, oh, I guess it defaults to Z already. So I can bring this little guy up a little bit, and then I can do it again. Whoops. So I'll hit E, and this one I might like move over a little bit. So I'm just hitting G to move, and I'm hitting R to rotate. And I'll do that a couple more times and just make a little stem. So I'm just hitting G to move and R to rotate. It's not perfect, but now we've got this little stem. I'll turn my subsurf back on, and so you can see what that looks like. Not bad. Okay, let's go down here and make a little dimple in the bottom of our apple. So I'm gonna go down to the bottom. I'm gonna hit double A to deselect everything. I'm gonna hit B and select all these bottom vertices. And I'll hit B again to get these guys. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna hit I to inset. And then once I inset, I'm just dragging the mouse and it's just scaling already. So I'm just gonna inset a little bit and then hit I again. Oops, I hit E by mistake. I'm gonna hit I again to inset more. And then I'm just gonna hit G and Z and move this guy up a little bit. And because I have this nice subsurf on here, this geometry by itself is very like square and weird looking, but that subsurf makes everything kind of round and nice. Okay, that's enough for now. Again, this is just some basics. It does take a while to get into modeling, but I just want to give you guys a couple of various concepts or approaches that we can do. This isn't a perfect apple, but it'll be good enough for what we want to do. So I'm going to go back to object mode. I'm just going to hit tab, and we've got our little apple, sort of a lopsided apple, but that's okay. And I'm going to go over one more thing, and then we're going to throw this into Godot and turn this into a little collectible. So I'm going to actually go ahead and apply my subsurf because I'm not going to do anything more with the geometry. But if you might do stuff with the geometry later, you can always just duplicate this and apply the other one. So if I wanted to do that, I would hit Shift D to duplicate and then just click to leave it in the same place. And then I'll hide my original cube. Now I have this new cube, and I'm just going to go down here and apply this modifier. And another thing I can do, you see these like squares because of the shading. If I want it to shade smooth, I can go to my, where would I find that? I can go to objects. I don't really remember, so I'm going to, oh, maybe it's in here. Here it is, shade smooth. I actually have this set as like as a quick thing on my version in my setup, so I have it as a quick favorite because I use it a lot. So now I can just hit Q and shade smooth, but it's under the object menu. All right, so one last thing to show you guys. So if I want to add some materials to this, now that I have this new model that I've created, It looks kind of more like a pear than an apple, but whatever. Okay, let's go over to our UV editing. So you can see there's all the like vertices that I've added. One thing that I can do if I want to have different colors on a model, and you can do this with a model that you've made or a model that you've imported, is you can select specific vertices and assign different materials. So if I go to my materials tab down here, you can see it doesn't have any materials. So I'm gonna hit A and select all of the vertices, and then I'm just gonna make a new material. That's gonna take a second. I accidentally made two. That's okay. I'm gonna rename this material to apple skin. And I'm gonna go up here and turn on my material preview, because otherwise I won't be able to see this. And I'm just gonna change the color here. I'm gonna make this like a red apple. Okay, so I don't really need to do anything else. I could do a lot here, but I'm just gonna set the color, and that should transfer over to Godot. So I've got my apple skin here, but if I want to add two materials, what I can do is just select the vertices that I want to add, like my stem material. So what I'll do is I'll try to kind of line this up where I can see it, and I'll turn on X-ray view, and then I'll just use the box select and just get all of the stem. And then I didn't get everything, so I'm just gonna come in here and try to just make sure I get all of the parts of the stem that I want. You have to be a little bit careful because we don't want to select any of the apple. Maybe if I go like down here, I'll be able to... Okay, that one's gonna be tricky. So another way that I can select vertices is by drawing on them with C. So if I hit C, I'll get this little brush, and then I can just draw to select the rest of these vertices. Okay, so I'm gonna get all the vertices I want to be part of my stem. And then when I'm done, I just hit enter. Okay, so now I can make a new material. So I just hit the plus button here. And I already accidentally made a material, so I'm just gonna select that one and call this apple stem. And then I just click on this assign button. And so now for my material, if I go to surface and change this color to like some brown color, now we see that we have these two different materials that affect different parts of our mesh. Okay, so I might want to select this last stem. So I'll get my C again, or this last area. And I'll grab these guys. Whoops. But notice I accidentally selected one of these verts, so I'm just gonna hit shift and then click on that, and it'll unselect or deselect. And then I accidentally selected some verts over here as well. So I'm gonna hit C and then shift, and that'll remove those. Okay, same thing down here, C and shift and remove those. And then I'll go back to my material and click assign. And so now I've got a wider stem there. Okay, so it's not a perfect apple, but it's good enough for us to get started adding into our scene. So once I've got what I want here, I'm going to select this object, and I'm going to go to File and go to Export, and I'm going to use a GLB. And I'll just go to my project folder and go to Models, and I'll call this apple.glb. And I'm just going to say I just want the selected objects because I have multiple objects in there. And it may be kind of big, so I'm going to leave this open because I may want to scale it down a little bit. But I'm going to export this. And so let's go over to Godot and let's add it in here. So we're going to create our component, and eventually we'll be able to walk around and sort of eat the apple or collect these items. So I'm going to start with a new 3D scene, and I'm going to rename this Collectible. And I'll save this in my scenes folder under components. Click save. And so I'm just going to start with the model. So I'm going to go down to my models here, find my apple, and just drag it in there. It's pretty big. I guess we don't know what it looks like relative to the rest of the scene, so I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And I'm just going to set the position to the origin. So there we've got this apple. And so now what we want, the only other thing we really need in here for now is to add some collider so that when our player runs through this mesh, we'll know that the player is collided with the mesh and they'll get the apple. So I could make a mesh that matches the shape of the apple exactly, but it's not really necessary. We'd be doing extra work on the game engine side. We can just use a little circle and make sure that it's inside the apple so we don't collect it before we get to it, and use that as our collectible. So I'll click on my main collectible node and click a plus, and I'll make a collision shape. And inside our collision shape, I'll just choose a sphere. And as long as it's inside the apple, I think that's fine. Oh, it's giving me a warning. Oh, you know what? I shouldn't have started with a node 3D. I need something that's an area, because I need to be able to collide with this thing. So node 3D doesn't have collision detection. So I'm going to go up to the main node here and change this to an area. So an area, it'll detect when the player is entered, but it won't prevent the player from walking through it. So we'll add that in there. So now we've got our collision shape. I'm going to click on this, and it looks like it's inside the apple. So I think that's probably fine. If it, I could make it bigger like that, but then we would run into it before we get there. It's kind of like, it's pretty small, so you might test this and say it's too hard to get in there, but I think it's probably fine. So I'll just leave that as is, and then we're just going to add a script here that basically just alerts our player when we run through it. So we're going to write that in a second, but before we write that script, actually, I want to make another script, and I'm going to talk about a couple programming concepts. So we're doing a bunch of different stuff in this demo, but that's kind of how things go when we're building a game. There's a lot of different components that all kind of fit together. Okay. Is there anything else? I'm trying to remember if there's any. Oh, yeah. One last thing I want to do. So with my apple, I want to go to my collision section over here in the inspector, and I want to make a new layer for the apple so that it doesn't interact with other objects in my scene. So I'm going to go down here and go to Edit Layer Names, and I'll just make a new layer. I don't necessarily want this to be layer 2. I feel like there's probably more important stuff. So I'm going to, I think, like platforms. I don't know why I don't have that yet, but platforms should probably be layer 2. And I guess this will be fine for layer 3. I'll make this collectible. Okay, so I'll switch this to layer 3 and turn off layer 1. And then for the mask, we just want to make sure that it interacts with the player. So the mask is set up in the way that we want it to already, which is part of why we just leave the player on the default layer 1. That way, it's very simple. We can leave most of these setups the same. Okay, so we're going to save this, and then we're going to start writing some scripts. So I'm going to go over to my scripting window. I'm going to close all of this stuff. And I'm going to make a new script. Whoops. Okay, so this first script that I'm going to create, I'm going to make a global script. And this is a script that we just use to keep track of things that we want to keep track of throughout the game, regardless of what level we're on. So things like the score of the game, you want to know what the score is, even if you're on the main menu or on level 2 or level 3. And so we have to make a script that's running all the time, even outside of our levels. So I'm just going to call this script global.gd. And I'm going to change the path and make sure it's in my scripts folder. And I'm going to click open there. Okay. So this script is going to start out very, very simple. And basically, for now, all we're going to be adding is a variable that tracks how many apples we've collected. So to make a variable in Godot and many other programs as well, we start with this keyword VAR. which is shorthand for variable. Variable is just a term for something that we want the computer to remember, essentially. A variable is like a keyword or a shorthand for some data, some value. Variables are similar to, like, there's lots of things that we use in day-to-day life where we have a shorthand that represents something that, we know exists, but we don't, we can't encapsulate. So a zip code is a really good example of this. Wherever you live, you probably have a zip code. BMCC is in a zip code. It's 1007 or 10007. That's a very simple number. It's very easy to remember, but it represents a whole large area of geography. And so in day-to-day life, we use variables all the time. We use these keywords or names to refer to things that would be hard to refer to, in a more complex way. So we're going to call this variable apple underscore count. So when you're creating a name of a variable, it's important that it describes the thing that it's keeping track of. It doesn't actually matter what you call this. You could call it banana count, or you could call it, airplane count. It really doesn't matter what actual words you use, but it should describe the thing that it's doing. Another thing you'll probably notice that I have this little underscore here. When we're making a variable, we can't use spaces, because spaces in programming represent that we're done with one part of our syntax and we've moved on to the next part of our syntax. So if I have two words in my variable, I use an underscore to make it more readable. I could just write it like that, but that's hard to read because it doesn't really look like, what we're used to reading. So normally I put an underscore here. Some programming languages use a different convention called camel case, where they use a capital letter at the end of the first word and the beginning of the second word. But it sort of depends on the programming language. And you'll notice as we write more scripts in Godot that they prefer this underscore convention. So then we're going to assign our value. Okay, so when we assign a variable, we use the equal sign. This is sort of like in math, but it's a little bit different. In math, when you use an equal sign, what you're really saying is that the value on the left and the value on the right are the same value. So if x equals 5, x and 5 are the same. In programming, this really means that we're assigning a piece of data to this variable name. So the variable name is more like a zip code. It's more like a pointer that says, there's this value, and if you want to know what it is, you can just use apple count, and I'll tell you what it is. So to start, we're going to set it to 0. When we start the game, we haven't collected any apples. Okay, so this is very simple. This is our first script. One thing that we do in programming as well is we add something called comments. Comments are parts of the script that the game engine ignores, so we can basically write notes. And this is useful for us to remember why we wrote something a certain way. It's also useful if we're collaborating with other people. Most games are made with large, studios and lots of different collaborators. And so we use comments to explain to other developers what our code is doing. So I'm going to make a comment. To write a comment in Godot script, you just add a little hashtag, and then you can write whatever you want after this. So I'm going to say counter for Apple Collectible. So this is just a little note that explains what this is doing here. Okay, so that's our simple global.gd script. If we want this script to run, it's not going to be attached to an object in our scene, so we have to add it to our main program. So to do that, we go to Project and Project Settings, and we go to Auto Load, and we choose our global script, click Open, and then we add, and we'll be able to access this value by using the keyword global. And for some reason it capitalized this. I'm just going to change this to a lowercase just to keep it the same as the script name. And then you have to make sure it's on. It's on by default, but just make sure it's on. So now if we want to reference this in another script, we'll just say global. And then let me put a note here, reference with global.apple count. So global refers to this script, and then we use the dot to say we want a part of that script. and then we can reference our apple count that way. So if we want to know how many apples the player's collected, we can ask for that. Or if we want to change that number when the player collects an apple, we can do that through our code. Okay, so now we're ready to write our collectible script. And that's also going to be very simple, but it's going to involve a couple more concepts. Any questions on our global script? Cool. All right, so we're almost done. So when our player collects a collectible, we just want to change this number. Eventually, we'll display the number in our UI. And with more complex items, we might be able to unlock doors or, add magic spells or add health points or other things like that. But for now, we're just going to change this number. So to add a script to a component, we click on the main component, and then you can click the script button here. We do want to make sure that this goes into the scripts folder. We don't want our scripts just sitting all over the place. Different people have different opinions about this type of organizational stuff, but I like to keep things organized by type. So I'm going to click on that folder and go to scripts and save this in here. So notice that the default script changes. It extends in area 3D. Our global script just extends node. So extends, I think I've mentioned this before, but extends basically means that because this type is in area 3D, there's certain things that we can do, like we can reference the position or the collisions that we couldn't do with just a generic node. All we really want to do is know if the player has collided with our collectible. So I'm gonna start with a variable that just detects whether or not we have collided. So we're just gonna say let's say collected, and we'll call this false. This isn't going to be that useful now, but when we add more stuff like animation and sound, we're going to want to be able to use this. So when we start our game, all of the collectibles are set, and are they collected is false. Okay, so false is a Boolean variable or a Boolean value. This means that there's just two options, true or false. And so this just lets us keep track of whether or not our collectible is collected. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect a signal. Okay, so this is another concept that's really important in Godot. We have these things called signals, which detect things that are happening in the game engine and communicate to our script. So to do this, I'm going to click on my collision shape, and I'm going to go over to this node section. And under signals, oh no, sorry, this is part of my area 3D. I've got my items backwards today. Okay, so under the area 3D, which is this main node, we have different signals for when things happen. And the one that we want is the body entered. This is basically going to happen when the player enters this area. So if I double click on this signal, it's going to connect this event when the player enters this area to my collectible. So it's going to make up a name for this function. Receiver method basically means how do we connect this event to the script. And you can just click connect. If this is like really long or weird, you can write something else, but on body entered is perfectly fine. So we're just going to click connect. Okay, so notice that it added this code for us. I'm going to get rid of a couple lines. So it added this code for us. It says on body entered, and it adds this little green thing. So the green thing shows us our signal. And we can always delete that if we want to, but we're going to leave it for now. So it adds this function for us, and then it actually has a reference to the player body. We don't actually need this right now. So if you have a reference that you don't need, Godot wants you to add an underscore in front. That just signals to the game engine just to not worry about this for now. Later, we might add something there if we want to. This pass is a default that basically just prevents the script from throwing an error. If you don't have any code inside your function, you're going to get an error. And so if you add a signal by mistake and you never actually write the function, you'll get an error. And so that's why Godot adds this here. But we're just going to delete that. And so all we're going to do here is we're just going to increase the value of our item count. And then we're going to print it out to the console just so we can see that it's working. So it's very, very simple. So we're going to say global dot, what did I call this? Apple count. So we're going to say global dot apple count equals, and then I'm going to say the same thing, global dot apple count plus 1. So what this means, so I'll put a comment here that says when player enters, increment apple count by 1. So basically whatever the current value is, we're going to add 1 to it. So if the current value is 0, it's going to become 1. If it's 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So after we do that, this script is going to get more complicated later, but for now, we're going to keep it very simple. After we do that, we're going to remove the apple from the scene. That's very easy to do. We just use this default function from Godot called queue_free. So when I type in QUE, Godot kind of like guesses what I'm trying to do. And we want this first one, so I'm just going to hit enter. And so Godot adds it in here. And I'm just going to say removes object from scene. That's our whole script. So it's really just a few lines of code, but the game engine is doing a lot of the work for us by adding the signals and doing other stuff. Okay, so let's see if this actually works. Let's go to our 3D scene and let's make a new, or actually I'm just going to use one of my old levels just to save a bit of time. So I'm going to open up level 2. And I'm going to throw some collectibles in here and we'll see if they work. Oh, I forgot one last thing I want to do just to see that I actually did this, because we're not going to see anything change on screen except the apple moves. If I want to see what's happening in my game without changing what's happening on the screen, I can use this thing called the console, or in Godot they call it the output. If I say print, I'm going to print stuff into that output. So I'm going to print apple count. This right here is just a string, so I'm just using this as a label. So anything that's in quotation marks is not code, it's a data that's just some text. And then I'm gonna put global.apple count. And so we're gonna see as I collect apples, it's gonna increase that value. Okay, so let's go back to our 3D scene and I'll add a few of these guys in here. So first I'm going to create a default node just as a kind of a folder for my apples. So I'll call this collectibles. And then I'm going to use this link button. So this is how I added the player. So I'm going to add the link button and search for my collectible. And I'm going to click open. And so there we see our apple. It's quite large. It's sort of like bigger than the player. So why don't we scale that down real quick? I'm going to go back over to Blender and just hit, I'm going to hit N so I can see my transform menu. I'm going to hit S. I'm going to hit 0.2, scale it down a lot. And then I'm going to hit Control A, apply scale. And then I'm just going to export. So I'm going to export GLB and just replace the apple. When I go back to Godot, that is more of a normal sized apple. Okay, so let's take our apple and move it over here. And then I'm just gonna make a few of them. So I'm gonna hit Command D to duplicate and move this over here. And I'll do that again and do that again. And let's put one over here and just line these up. So we'll throw a few of these in here. This is another good way to kind of like encourage the player to go in one direction or another. It's basically like Pac-Man. In Pac-Man, you collect the little dots, and they're, it's satisfying to collect everything. So it encourages the player to move through the scene. So let's see if this works. Let's run our scene. The load time for this is not very good. I wonder if I'll have to debug that a little bit. Okay, so when I hit this apple, it disappears. Okay, so we got all our apples. And then if we look in our output log here, you can see apple count 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can see the number of apples that we've collected goes up. And in a couple weeks, we'll be able to, we'll add the sound, so that'll be a little more satisfying. We'll add a display, so we'll be able to see it. But for now, we just want to get this basic setup. Okay, so that's everything. There's a whole bunch of different components. So that's kind of how game design works a lot of the time. To make something simple, we have to do a bunch of different things. Of course, you don't have to model your own apple. I just wanted to demonstrate that, but you guys can, find models, or you can just use basic shapes or whatever you want to do with that. But I think those are a couple good simple scripts to get us into the practice of writing some code to get started with. And yeah, that's it for now. In the second part of class, I'm going to go over something that's a little bit more complicated, but has kind of a similar concept, which is adding moving, sort of self-moving, kind of like enemies or agents into our scene. All right.